I do think it's really important, and I think it needs to be a much more critical part of the education system is teaching logic, thinking, probabilistic thinking, teaching young people how to analyze their own bias as well as the bias of others and sources that they're examining, and then teaching them how to actively use those skills in their life all around, grocery store, consuming media, shopping online, talking to friends, talking to family members. I think it is very critical.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between or beyond. Today, something a little bit different, although there is a sci-fi element in it, but we'll be getting a little bit political in this episode. So today I'm here with Michael Fedor. With over 20 years of political organizing and narrative expertise, Michael transforms his real-world experience from the wild, woolly worlds of Washington, D.C. and state capitals into gripping tales of power, ambition, and the human condition. His fast-paced, edge-of-your-seat writing style pairs seamlessly with meticulous research, creating thrillers that are not only exciting, but also terrifyingly plausible. Having moved from the classroom as a teacher to grassroots organizing, Michael has worked on campaigns at every level, from local to presidential, gaining first-hand insight into the personal costs of pursuing power. A former candidate and elected official himself, Michael retired from political life in 2020. He's earned both master's and bachelor's degrees from Penn State University. As a father and husband, he thoroughly enjoys forging new memories by planning adventures from the Fedor family bucket list. Michael remains undefeated at pub trivia. Hi, Michael. Thanks for joining me today.
Edwin, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, do you still remain undefeated at pub trivia?
I am, but I am selective about my contests I enter.
I was
Perhaps
wondering
like
that,
Mike
yeah.
Tyson.
So is this like you only pick the competitions you can win?
I careful not to pick things that maybe put too much to chance. There are certain categories I think I'm good at, but pop culture gets to be tough because I do not keep up on all the bands and actresses and actors' names. So if it's heavy on science, if it's heavy on like your typical trivia game board, I can handle that.
Yeah, that's like my family keeps telling me we play Trivial Pursuit and I do rather well. And they say, oh, you should go on like these game shows or whatever. I'm like, are you kidding? They would rip me apart. Like all the
Yeah,
stuff on those shows are like pop culture, like you say.
right. Hey, I'm with you. Like no one plays Trivial Pursuit with me anymore. It's not fun for them.
So you started. I mean, you're now a writer. You had a political career, but you started teaching. Is that right? I mean, I think there
That's
was a
right.
step before that, but what was your? I mean, how did you get into teaching? I guess first of all.
Yeah, so I landed there. I was originally a political science major, and in a legislative behaviors class I had at Ithaca College in New York, we had to mock the U.S. Senate. So we had to pick a senator, and we had to pretend to be them for 18 weeks. And we had like mock Senate sessions and mock committee hearings. And the senator I picked was Mike DeWine, who is now the governor of Ohio. And he was not interesting. He had gone straight from college and university, got his Juris Doctorate, and never practiced law. He just went into elected office. And for me, the light bulb moment was I do not want to be a political leader with no real world experience whatsoever. I want a career. I want background. I want context so that if I'm someday working on tax policy, I know what it means to actually try to earn wages and pay my taxes from something that's not just some high ranking political office. So changed my major, then transferred to Penn State University, and discovered that education and working with young people was something that really excited me. And it was always writing was a very important part of who I was. I had won a essay competition my senior year of high school that earned me enough money to buy my first computer. And so for me, writing was always there, and literature, becoming an English teacher, just made sense. And so um, I went on to teach high school English in rural Pennsylvania in the United States. And for the most part, really loved it. Loved working with young people. I was charging at it from the John Keats style, Dead Poet Society, Robin Williams character. Um, standing on desks, reading Walt Whitman, challenging students these to question authority and to define themselves at this critical time in their lives. But there was a movement underway to change public education, and I was adverse to that. And so I left the classroom to go become a political organizer and help elect people who I felt would have the right approach for not just education, but labor and economic policy. And that was 20 years of my life working in campaigns, working in state and federal government, work with state and federal officials on everything from local office, which I held, to U.S. Senate, congressional, and presidential campaigns, which I did not hold, but um, learned a lot in the process. And it's why I write political thriller with science fiction edge. It's because it's what I know. I was not a sea captain, so I don't write mariner stories. I I know politics, and that's what's really been a large portion of my career. And so these like two worlds of literature and politics are merging for me as now I embark on this journey to be a writer.
So I am curious. I mean, it must be great actually to have the English background for your writing, but just making a step back, I suppose. So I have a child in high school right now in the UK. So I am curious about the education system.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering what was it that you saw that was changing that you didn't like?
There was an emphasis on high stakes testing as the means to demonstrate whether the children were learning. And unfortunately, at the time, those standards were not done to be like implemented for the incoming kindergarten or first graders. They were implemented at once to all grade levels. And the challenge is if you have, for me, teaching 11th graders, 16, 17-year-olds who have perhaps had very challenging educational careers, it's hard to suddenly say, pass this test or don't graduate high school. And I felt that was an injustice. I felt that it was holding them to a standard they couldn't possibly achieve and could not remedy or remediate in 12 to 18 months, which is what they would have to do under that system. And I think maybe one of the best illustrations of this moment for me was an assistant superintendent came in to meet with the English department and told us that many of our students who were in the trades, who went to Voc Tech high school and then came back to the main school for core subjects, would probably not experience much literature in their life. And we ought to consider integrating more manuals and more technical writing into the curriculum so they would better speak to what they needed. And I think that the comment came from the right place, but in my militant 23-year-old mind, I felt that was it was just a horrible sentence for these kids. And my comment to the assistant superintendent at the time was great. When their grandmother passes away and they have to get up and eulogize her at her funeral, they can read a manual to the audience. Or when their girlfriend dumps them or their boyfriend dumps them, they can find solace in a manual or a piece of technical writing. My suggestion at the time was that that's the role of poetry. That's the role of literature. It provides cultural context. It provides depth for our souls. It provides comfort to our hearts. I still believe that. Maybe not in the militant way I did when I was 23, but I still understand that there's a time and place. And I think that what American education has gotten away from is building people who are well-rounded and who you know seek knowledge, not just repeat facts or can pass tests. And I've got a high school student in my life, I've got a middle school student in my life, and I have a first grader in my life. And I can tell you that their education has changed dramatically from when I was a teacher. And I don't think they always ask the right questions. I don't think they're always looking for depth. I don't think they're always looking for logic behind why, asking questions like why do I think this? What's my bias? Why is this author telling me I have to think this? So I think that's still the thing that's missing in education.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, just to allude to your previous comment about manuals and stuff, I've been accused of writing like a manual or like writing personal letters, much like a manual, to be honest. But I come from a science background, so
Sure, that's your
um,
technical side
yeah,
coming through.
yeah, I completely agree with the whole how would you describe it? Maybe thinking, questioning perspective as well. It feels like, well, we know, I think, that the school systems were largely in modern times set up to create workers. Um, Maybe not originally back far enough, but the modern sort of British style of school system. Um, and I feel the same way with science. So again, with my science background, you come from the English background. I find it interesting. We both sort of have this same view. I feel that science in many ways is being taught wrong as well, in that it should focus on the questioning aspect of it rather than just memorization of what someone else did in the past. Do you see any hope that this kind of thing might change?
Yes, I'm aware of some organizations and some movements to put more critical thinking. Think Age of Reason. What created the United States at all was the Age of Reason, was the age of analysis and logic, coming forth and saying, if one person is free, then why is not another? Why shall a king have certain rights, but his subjects not? And so I think that really brought forth what is the country that allows me to be an author and write freely without censorship. Do I think that this will happen naturally? I do not. I address this in my book, in What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose. There is a piece of technology that is a subplot or a thread in the story called the mark. And the purpose of the mark is to allow people to know if something is true or false or somewhere in the middle, altered, without them having to think critically about it at all. It just does it for them automatically, instantaneously. And perhaps that is me subtly saying, I don't think things are going to get better in that regard. I think people are going to be, pick your word, lazy. I think they're going to be uncritical in their thinking, and they will continue to rely on commodities and products to tell them what's real and what's not. And I think that's part of the reason politically, we're going to have a little bit of a political conversation today, why the US and the UK and Italy and other countries are moving in the directions they're moving is because people are getting half of their information from people that are not news sources, that are not, independent, verifiable sources. They're getting information from influencers and from people who have a certain agenda and who have a certain frame in which they tell a story. And I think that is unfortunately pushing things in the direction that we're seeing around the world, away from liberty and away from um, small d democratic principles into something that's entirely different and perhaps unseen yet. And we'll be curious to see how it evolves from here.
It's kind of like I suppose moving towards the movie Idiocracy, or perhaps the people 700 years in the future in Wall-E. But I was just
Yes.
wondering. So a lot of people do criticize independent content, let's say, but do you feel that the media itself has a responsibility? Because they've been, let's say, called out quite a lot for their own lies as well. And if you can't trust the mainstream media, then of course you're going to turn to other sources, aren't you?
Yeah, right. So in the UK, you guys have the tabloid industry, right? Huge
Well,
industry,
even the BBC, for example, which
right?
£4 billion a year.
In the US, we have CNN, Fox News, ACN, ABC, MSNBC. Um, those all have moved towards what I call freely infotainment. It is not like a news broadcast like we will still see in the United States on network television at 6:30 every night, where they sit down and they read the day's headlines and they give us factual snippets of the major news of the day. That used to be what CNN did in 1 hour beats. Now, what those news channels do is it's just editorialize in 12-minute segments and 15-minute segments, 24 hours a day. And they intersperse news, but they constantly react and commentate on the news in a way that creates, I think, um, a biased analysis instantaneously of what events are occurring. It's not like Peter Jennings. It's not like Tom Brokaw. It's not like Barbara Walter, is this is like, we're seeing a situation in the US where we are constantly getting information and it's instantaneously being analyzed for us with commentary that's overlaying the factual um, recitation of the news. And people are picking their channel and they're more and more in their own little circular web of self-confirmation of what they already believe and not getting any information that would challenge what they think is true. The very, very dangerous place, but I think that's where we're at, unfortunately. And I think, yes, major networks, major broadcasters, they're all guilty of this because they're chasing money. And I unfortunately worry that the incoming administration in the United States is going to start picking winners and losers with FCC licenses. And I think it will actually shake the media landscape up pretty dramatically. But I don't think that the incoming administration is going to be apologetic about saying which networks they think they like and don't like to be using public airwaves.
I'll be very curious about that. Yeah, because I kind of feel, well, it's already happened in Canada. Of course, they're pretty open about that in the previous years in the Trudeau administration. But I was wondering, it's kind of, I thought it was already there in the US. I mean, the embedded media during the Iraq War kind of started this thing, didn't it?
That's a
And then
good
it's just sort
insight.
of snowballed from there, it seems.
Yeah, war sold. And think about the Gulf War, even of 91,
Hmm.
right? That was the beginning of infotainment. It's the beginning of CNN really being the only network that could broadcast war 24 hours a day. And then the other networks came on shortly after that. So yeah, I think they're guilty of this. And like I said, I think it's now going to come full circle on them where the question will be, well, what angle are you telling? And does someone who has the authority to keep you on the network like that angle? And if not, or do they feel a need to act on that? And that could then start this cycle of left and right bouncing back and forth, picking winners and losers in network news. And it does call out the role of NPR and the AP and Reuters and some others to be these arbiters of fact. But as you'll see in my story, I think they're also going to be subject to this type of editorializing and this verification process. And because we're all going to be wondering in a matter of years what's true and what's not. We already can't tell the difference in most cases. And so if it gets more advanced and happens more rapidly to us, people are really going to be spinning because they won't have the ability to discern fiction from reality.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, maybe we'll get into the wars. I don't know, that's political stuff. But one of the things with the wars going on that I kind of gave up very quickly on trying to like, especially getting worked up over things you hear because I very quickly realized I actually don't know what's going on.
Hmm.
There's so many perspectives. You have the mainstream and they have their own bias, and you have other people presenting their own bias, and then you've got and you know that behind it there's also agendas. Um, and so I kind of gave up on trying to sort of understand it and sort of stick with my principles of, war is bad and ultimately it hurts people, right?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so what I wonder is, I completely agree with you that it's going to be incredibly difficult, already is, to tell what's what and what the reality is. Do you think at least we should be teaching our kids, I guess, how to discern the bias of the, because I don't think the bias is going to go away, especially with the social media culture. I think one reason legacy media is coming so hard on this sort of clickbait stuff and editorializing and things is because they're challenged by the new media, and they're losing subscriber numbers, they're losing funding, and they have to find a way to gather that back. And I think they're challenging that. So they're going to hold to a bias just because that draws attention to them. So do you think it's important that we teach our kids, how to judge the bias of a like a presentation, whether it's independent media, whether it's corporate media, and then because and then just let them go with it, right? We're not going to be able to sort out the mess, I don't think, anytime soon.
I do think it's really important, and I think it needs to be a much more critical part of the education system is teaching logic, thinking, probabilistic thinking, teaching young people how to analyze their own bias as well as the bias of others and sources that they're examining, and then teaching them how to actively use those skills in their life all around grocery store, consuming media, shopping online, talking to friends, talking to family members. I think it is very critical. But I think that we're also, I think the media landscape in general is a bit of a pendulum, and I don't think we're swinging in a direction that we haven't already been in the age of modern press. You can go back to the 1900s when there were left newspapers and right newspapers who told the same stories with wildly different facts. Facts. So I think that things history doesn't repeat, but it echoes, I think is the quote. And so I think that there's times in which we're kind of coming back to that age, and probably external events, world events, would push us back to needing more clearly factual information in order to survive. And so at this moment, that's not what won the day in the US political landscape. It wasn't facts that won the day, it was guts, it was instinct, it was opinion. And so we'll see how long that serves people before they want to swing back in another direction.
I suppose the biggest question in your election was, were there any real facts anywhere? A pretty big challenge.
Yeah, no. I think that, well, everyone's telling their own version of facts. And I think also it's the facts. An old labor leader I used to work with used to say, uh, figures lie and liars figure. And so even when you think that you are relying on information like the US economy is strong, it's what the facts might say, the average person who did not see a 45% increase in their wages over the past 5 years would tell you point blank, yes, inflation's down, but eggs are still $5 a carton in the United States, and they were $2 before the pandemic. So, and I'm not making twice the money I was making than 5 years ago. So that's the problem, right? So, again, it's contextualizing the facts. And at the end of the day, I think people are just in the US, like they in Italy and maybe in Great Britain, like maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, they're just dissatisfied with the status quo and they want someone will come in and not be afraid to break some things in order to change direction. So the Italians have swung right, France nearly did, Great Britain already did, and now it's swung left again, but it keeps swinging because it's not happy. So it's throwing out the incumbent party. And so that's really what happened in the US. They threw out the incumbent Democratic Party in the United States in place of maybe something that's not going to solve the problems any easier, the Republican Party of the United States, led by Donald Trump. But they're willing to take that risk because they're just so dissatisfied with the status quo.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the perspectives you hear on various issues, and I really do encourage people to try and at least sample the perspectives from all sides, because again, you'll hear sort of official numbers on inflation, and then you go to the other side and they'll say, well, those are the official numbers, but they haven't factored in these things, which mean that the effective inflation is actually higher, blah, 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 back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do agree. The pendulum constantly swings. And the problem I think we're in now is, um, I think there's pretty strong evidence that it was dominant in the far left for about the last 10 to 15 years, going further left. And so as it swings back, the way pendulums work, they don't just stop in the middle. They they
Mhm.
they swing back with the same momentum that they had going the other way. And so that's always the problem, is how do you, because I firmly believe that the ideal situation is to have sort of center left and center right in dialogue, because we can't, it's like a boat going through a wind, or so you have to tack into the wind, right? You go one direction, then the other direction, um, and you end up going straight, more or less, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that we can, as humans, stay in the middle. We don't know really how to do that. We kind of veer one side, then we veer back the other side, and that's how I view politics. The problem then comes is when it starts veering too much in one direction, it'll veer back and too much in the other direction, and then the whole system gets out of kilter.
Right. So maybe what the good context here is that for decades in the US system and in in London, in Great Britain as well, you had political parties on left and right, and you had some in the center, but they moderated one another
Right.
because they had to rely on one another's to cut deals to get things done. So they all had to give, and they all had in order to get. And the idea of just dominating the system in order to capture power and enact their entire agenda was really not as possible as perhaps it is today. Um, I was just with Chuck Todd, who is of NBC News, and he was talking to me about um, the externality of World War II forced the two parties in the US towards the center. It's because the external threat of Nazism, fascism, and Italian um, fascism, nationalism forced the two parties to get closer towards the center. So while they disagreed about what to do about fascism, they both agreed it was bad. Um, and the same thing happened in the Cold War. It was in response to communism. They both had different suggestions about what to do about it, but they were closer together. Um, 9/11, perhaps radical Islamic fundamentalism and had maybe a very small flash of moment in terms of length of time where it actually changed world politics. But it did for a moment the US contract the two parties back to the center where there was a lot of agreement. Maybe not on good things, but they agreed on war and they agreed on restriction of rights in order to protect the homeland. Um, I'm not saying I want international crisis, but what's lacking to drive these parties back to the center is a unifying external threat. And so they're continuing to spin off in space in opposite directions. And in my book, What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, the question that is posed is, well, what if these two parties are so useless that that makes them wholly the same? They believe vastly different things, but they're both committed to getting nothing done, or they're both unable to get anything done. And so, does that essentially mean they're one and the same? And rather than describing the Bull Moose Party in the book as a centrist party, I would describe it as a reform party, a multi-dimensional party that is looking at the things that are broken and reaching to the left in some solutions, or reaching to the light and to the right in others, and not being so, as political parties tend to be, they become fixated on their position on the spectrum. And the bull moose in the book is saying the world and political dynamics are more of a globe, a sphere, and we need to operate three-dimensionally within that sphere, sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes left, sometimes right, close, far. And when we do that, the party itself becomes more agile and can respond to actual problems. I think that doesn't exist in the US. There is no political vehicle. There are very few politicians that can operate that way anymore because they usually get primaried and lose. In the British system, you'd have snap elections, those people would lose. So I think those are real questions to ask about, is the system we've designed itself of partisan politics broken, and what can be done about that so that you have people more free to operate outside the boundaries of their political party's ideology.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get into that a bit later as well. The sort of what seems like an oversimplified system for a complex modern world in a way.
Yeah.
Um, but you have sort of nailed down the issue that had happened at the last British election, which was that pretty much the entire country felt both parties were the same. I mean, one party was maybe proven itself now to be worse than the other party, but they're both were going to do the same things. One of them probably just doing it faster than the other one.
Hmm.
But we should probably touch on your political experience before we can get into your book.
Sure.
So from teaching, you did move into politics.
Hmm.
What prompted that, and then sort of what levels did you work at?
So I was active in my teachers union and got introduced to the AFL-CIO, and took a job working in organized labor in the United States and got to meet both members and leaders across 52 different unions and trades in the US, and quickly was organizing regionally and then nationally to help people have rights in the workplace, to organize for power, to organize for collective, shared safety, working conditions, and shared prosperity. And that was a big portion of what I did for better part of 10 years. And I did it first as just a political organizer. Then I started getting more involved in community service aspect and community relations aspect of organized labor, helping what's the unit called the United Way, which is helps people with public charities that help people who need help in life. It's a really great network. It was helped to be found by the AFL-CIO back in the 1950s, 40s after World War II. And then I started learning arbitration. I started learning collective bargaining and got more active in one particular union. And but that introduced me to a candidate for governor and governor of a state in the United States. And he was wanting to run a campaign. I was a political leader myself. I was a chairman of a party. I had been elected to local office, council in my community, and he asked me to come to work for him, and I took a risk. I jumped and did it, and worked directly on his campaign for governor, and he lost. But what an experience it was. I learned a lot, and then started to work more nationally with current officials, governors, senators, representatives, on issues for clients. I started working as a lobbyist. I started working more as a communication specialist. Um, and then, decided that, I didn't like that world as much as I thought I would, um, and started going down the consulting route. But so I've served local in a local council, and I've served as a political party leader at the local level, but I've worked on, and for congressional campaigns in the United States, U.S. Senate campaigns in the United States, um, as I mentioned, the governor's campaign and some other statewide offices. And then I worked on two different presidential campaigns in 2004 and again in 2008. Um, I did some work in the 2012 US presidential election, but far less. And I haven't done any presidential campaign work since 2012. I've done it mostly as a spectator, nothing formal. Um, that's my experience, and I think that's what's formed a large part of what I know about how these campaigns work and how the people who once they win, what they're like, what their considerations are, what the pressures are that they're under, and how do I weave those into stories, political stories. And so, I really got to meet, and us not just in the Northeast of the United States. I've worked nationally, and so I've worked with California political leaders and Vermont political leaders and Florida and Texas and Iowa. So it is the whole spectrum. And I think that's something that I've been proud about my career is that I've been able to work with people in both major parties in the US and some minor ones and do so in a way that still um, speaks to trying to solve problems, a little bit of pragmatic approach to problem solving. And I think that's helped me, gain some credibility and respect among people who, we may not agree on everything, but they like the fact that I'm level-headed. And I come from the idea that there ought to be some giving in order to get. And I wish there was more of that in the U.S. system.
Yeah, probably in politics in general, I think.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the bio, you've seen firsthand insight into the personal costs of pursuing power. What kind of examples, or what would be the most extreme example you've seen of that? Because it does feature in your book quite a bit.
It does. So I think a lot of times candidates underestimate the personal risk that comes with pursuing office. And the one that they underestimate most is not the risk to themselves. I think they're very focused on their risk. They're very focused on what are their skeletons. What if those stories are told? What if they're not told in the most flattering way possible? How will they deal with that? They are less prepared for the implications on people they love, who are also exposed as part of this ride to both having their lives exposed or to see their loved one come under attack, potentially lose. And it takes an emotional toll on those people too. And it does strain those relationships. And there are many, many, many relationships, including marriages, including father-son, father-daughter relationships that are damaged by people running for office that may not have to do anything with a some kind of infidelity or have anything to do with some kind of crisis, but it has everything to do with just the pressure those people were under during that experience and how they didn't like it, and it pulls those people apart. It weakens those bonds. And we're all human, and if some of those bonds were not strong to begin with, they can really, really harm already fragile relationships. And there's relationships also in the book that, things change over time in politics. Today's enemy is tomorrow's ally, and vice versa. And I've seen on more than one occasion people who trusted one another, who shared their dirty laundry, their greatest fears with people, who then turned and used it against them in order to get a leg up and to beat them down the road. And it happens in the book, it happens in real life. I imagine many politicians would tell stories about that experience of having someone they thought they would trust and work with their entire career turn on them and use what they knew against them, and them feeling maybe paralyzed to not be able to counterattack it.
Right. So I think we might be getting a bit ahead for the audience, because we haven't actually talked about what your book is, because I want to delve into this. So maybe I'll just go back and give like a short sort of summary of my view on that, and then we can sort of properly introduce the book, because it's so sort of intertwined with your path to writing and everything.
Sure.
That we don't want to get, we're already like half an hour in, so we but but yeah, so usually I go through a path to writing and then go into the books, but yours are so intertwined with your
Sure.
career and your writing.
Yeah.
So it is book one of your series is called it's called What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose, and you now have book two. It just came out this month, which is The Tree of Liberty,
Yep.
and those are the two books in what's going to be a trilogy, but possibly a larger series as well. Is that
I'm
right?
planning six. I
Six
think
altogether.
three books will be sequential, and then the next three be more episodic. And we'll see if the episodes really take off, then it could go endless. But at least six is my plan.
Excellent. So my summary, I guess, that I put down here. So it's 2044 and the next U.S. election is looming. It looks to be a boring one, with the incumbent winning until our protagonist Jackson Piper is given information that a fix is in with the election, and the incumbent is corrupt, basically. So Piper decides slash is convinced that he needs to run for president, to effectively save America. So through this vehicle, then you weave an engaging story of political drama that revolves around a presidential campaign. You highlight both the humanity and the corruption that is probably all too much the norm, as you've been suggesting. But you also use it as a vehicle to showcase some interesting political history, that I definitely wasn't aware of. And I'm always fascinated with going back to that, like let's say 100, 150 years ago, and realizing that, it wasn't nice, right? It was
Yeah.
pretty crazy as well. Um, and then you have the Tree of Liberty, which the famous quote is, I'm sure, a bit foreshadowing for what's happening there. I don't know how much we'll get into the end of the first book, Bull Moose, because we don't want to spoil it. Um, but it is dramatic and does touch on some interesting aspects. So I guess, yeah, I want to get back to the personal cost, but first, maybe you can just sort of give us your path from your political career, from your teaching, into what inspired this book, and then what was the process? Because I believe that you started writing in 2004,
Yeah.
something like that, so that's actually you're a bit more successful than me, because it mimics when I started more or less, and I still have that book sitting there half done. So, so
That's
what
good.
was
They
your
say
whole path?
never publish the first book. I started writing in 2004, after George W. Bush won re-election, John Kerry lost, and you had the Patriot Act, Dick Cheney, war in Iraq. These were like headline things at the time. And I was teaching Ray Bradbury and The Crucible by Arthur Miller. And so I started writing a book that was like Fahrenheit 451, a bit of a polemic, a bit of a political analysis of the status quo and of my grievances of what wasn't working. And I thought it was great. And I shared it with a colleague, Sue Peterson, who is a marvelous English teacher and a writer. and she did not think it was great. So I put it in a drawer and figured I'd come back to it someday. I started reading some books on craft. I left teaching. I went to work in organizing and in politics. In 2016, the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump created a circumstance where you had two wildly unpopular candidates for president who were like barreling towards an election day that no one was excited about. And that was the core of the story of the original Bull Moose book. There was a whole cast of characters running for president in the original book, and no one was exciting. And Jackson Piper emerged as this guy who was not only exciting, but was going to break the system in the process because he wanted to show that it was broken, it was corrupt. And so I took the book back out and I started working on it. I read some books on craft, and now self-publishing was becoming a much more viable vehicle for debut authors. And then my wife and I got pregnant with our third son, and her pregnancy was normal, but the birth was traumatic, and she and our child nearly died. Both of them are alive and well today, thank God. But it was my entire life making sure that they would survive and that they were cared for. The project just got backburnered again, and I moved away from it. On January 6th, 2021, in the United States, I was watching the end of the original Bull Moose book occur on television. In the book, the original book, the president refuses to accept the results of the election. And there is a political movement to try to force him from office. That's not quite what happened in the US, but there was a refusal to accept results. And there was a political, violent uprising to do something about that. And I was shocked. I was also saying to myself, wow, I was onto something with this book. If I have predicted some of these events that keep occurring, small and large, I should go back to that book. I should finish that book. I should get that book published so people would know what I saw 20 years ago, 5 years ago, and maybe take it as a warning or maybe take it as entertainment or something. So I started working on it again. It still was not good. I read some books on craft, set it aside again. Um, I had in 20 end of 2023, I lost a job I really loved because of downsizing, and I suddenly had a lot of time on my hands, and was not feeling great about that situation I was in. And writing was therapeutic. It was it was a release for me. It was escapism for me. It was something I knew I could do no matter what. It didn't require anyone else in the world to do it, just my time and talent. And so I sat down and listened to some podcasts that said, never publish your first work. You have to rewrite your work multiple times, and you need to work with developmental editors and copy editors. And so that's what I did. I rewrote that book from start to finish, and it went from 100,000 words to 165,000 words by the end of the first rewrite, and changed the story entirely. Um, Changed who was the protagonist, who was not protagonist, but changed the antagonist. I changed the villain, and I shifted kind of the stakes of the story and with the call to action, all of that changed. And then realized it was too long. And I had to edit it down. And, then that made for a different story. But it wasn't until I was halfway through that rewrite that I realized that I really love science fiction. Everything I watch, most of what I watch and get excited about is science fiction. But I was afraid that I was not a science fiction writer because I did not read a lot of science fiction, and was afraid of what it would be to try to write in that genre if I didn't know it. So I started reading some science fiction, and then I went back to Ray Bradbury, who I love, and thought, well, hell, that's what Bradbury was writing. He was writing philosophical science fiction. And it's a hell of a term because no one wants to read philosophical science fiction. And so I started thinking about rebranding it, renaming it political science fiction. And that's where I came up with this term poli-fi to describe what it is I write. I write political thriller with a science fiction edge, a futuristic edge. And there's hard science fiction in the story. I'm focused on what is plausible and perhaps what is trajectorily, speculatively possible in the near future. Um, but I'm doing that under the context of how the current political system works and how the current society functions, and discovered that my writing was so much more exciting and interesting, not just to me, but to readers, by having these elements of science fiction in it and having a sentient character, an AI sentient character in it, and playing with some of the challenges that emerge when AI dominates the economy. So that's when I think the writing took off, is when I committed to a genre that I loved but was afraid to write in. I just learned more about it. And then in 2024, I was committed. I was going to get this book published. I set a date when I was going to publish this book, and I started working backwards from that date to do all the things you have to do for a published work to happen. And there were points in which, I was writing 8,000 words a day, and then there were points in which I couldn't write 100 words a day. So it was an emotional journey. But it's one that I'm so thankful and so proud that I got across the finish line.
Yeah. So I mean, not that we need another science fiction subgenre, but
Right.
so do you consider it science fiction or cross genre?
I would call it cross genre. I'd still say it's thriller. But I think it has some DNA strands of science fiction in it. Um, because when I show it to science fiction podcasts and science fiction authors, they're like, well, I don't really know that this is science fiction. But when I show it to straight up political thriller people, they're like, well, there's science fiction in this. I can't talk about it. I don't promote science fiction. So again, I've landed in this gray area where it's not science fiction and it's not entirely science fiction. And that's why I think speculative is the best definition for it. What I'm doing, and it's not like today's political thriller is often terrorism thriller, and I don't write terrorism thriller. There isn't terrorism in the story. If it's terrorism, it's domestic. It's not international. Um, and that's more emblematic of Cold War political thrillers. So you go back to like Alan Drury, Tom Clancy, where it's not terrorism, it's state actors. It's about the politics within the US and how that's driving dynamics. So that's what I think I see as the moment that's rising again, is that type of political thriller, and I'm hoping that I'm helping to push that wave along.
Oh, excellent. So you I mean you read a lot of how to produce your book as well. Did you were also part of the book launch blueprint, is that right?
That's right.
So how did that go? Because I'm aware of the program. I've never taken it. I sort of got the free intro to it at one point, I think. But
Good. Thomas Umstattd Jr. is phenomenal, and he and his partner James L. Rubart have retired the book launch blueprint. And I think he will be back in a 2.0 in a couple years. I think entirely under Thomas's design. But it was absolutely what I needed in two respects. First, it systematized things I did not clearly know about the book publishing industry in terms of cover design and back cover copy, about genre specific conventions. And then it was also a wonderful accountability for me about setting deadlines and timelines that I had to stick to. That on a Monday, I had to turn in my back cover copy and I had to get it right. And I couldn't delay it, I couldn't push it off, and then to get feedback on it. So I think it was phenomenal in both regards. And if listeners don't know what we're talking about, it's part of the Novel Marketing Podcast and authormedia.com. And I think in both respects, it's a wonderful resource to learn not so much about the craft of writing, right? How to develop a character is not what Thomas Umstattd is teaching. Once you have that product, what do you have to do to get readers of that product? And it's a process and it's a business and it takes focus and discipline. And there are ways you can do it entirely wrong with bad covers and bad copy and bad editing. And so I think I really valued my participation in it. And I'm hoping to go to the Novel Marketing Podcast in Austin, Texas this January, because I'd love to be able to meet some of those folks in person.
excellent, yeah. Yeah, it's Well, it's one of the things that I think almost all authors complain about is the marketing side of things, and even with all the complaining, so few are willing to sort of accept that you need mentorship. Generally, it's not something that's natural, and it's something that's also very difficult to sort of pick up for most people, right? It's because it's a little bit of a foreign kind of mindset to get into in some ways. I mean, unless you've done things like that
Well,
before.
it's
But for many
right.
people, it's
It's harder to run into an editor like on the street corner or at the coffee shop. You could run into electricians. They have signs on their vans as they drive around town.
right.
Editors don't have signs on their car. So finding that community, it's a bit underground, I think, is a way to describe it. And I would also say that it's a bit of commiserating because writing is a lonely enterprise, and it's also one that's full of doubt and full of fear and full of talk track, in your own head, this talk track about I'm not good enough, this is not going to sell. So when you can talk to other people who have the same talk track in their head and how they shut those voices down and invest in the voices that say you can do this, we're going to do this, it's empowering and it's important to do that. Then it's also really important to recognize this is a business. Like I am an entrepreneur as much as I'm an author. I made a commitment early in my writing that I was writing commercially viable fiction. I was not writing for the entertainment or the cuteness of having published works. I genuinely am working to sell my works of fiction. And so there's things I need to do in terms of marketing channels and spending money on my marketing to make sure that people are aware that I even exist and having a website and having a reader magnet and all these other strategies that are really important to being commercially viable. And the investment, it takes time. I'm on at least a 5 year plan, more likely somewhere between 5 and 10. And I'm in year one, just finished year one today. So I'm beginning year two, and with an eye towards there's going to be 3 more years of this, 4 more years of this, building my platform, building my readership. And that's when I get kind of worried that I'm not selling books today, or I haven't landed, my 100th review on my work today, to give myself the grace that that's okay. It takes time, and it takes time to build that audience. And if you have the long view, then you don't get overwhelmed by the fact you haven't sold a book today, because there's going to be days where you sell nothing. There's going to be weeks where you sell nothing, especially the summer in the US.
Mm.
It's really hard to sell books in July and August in the July in the US, which I know now. So, you learn.
So, I mean, if you don't mind sharing, what kind of things were in your first year of your 5 to 10 year plan?
Yeah. So first and foremost, year one, and I've accelerated. So year one is normally like a lot of reading books on craft, and it's a lot of practice writing. I've already been doing that, and so I combined that with what's typically year two, which is you start drafting your first work. So my first year was both reading books on craft and practice writing, and drafting my first work. And I was also doing this full time, so I was able to accomplish what some writers have to do in 2 or 3 years. I did in one. So books on craft. I read Plot and Structure by James Scott Bell. Wonderful book. I recommend it to any fiction author who's trying to write their first book. Very important, as well as, books on structure. So knowing what is the hero's journey, knowing the snowflake method. Also read that book. Um, Read a great book on the first 5 pages. This is by Noah Lukeman. When people pick up a book in a bookstore, they read the first 5 pages to decide if they're going to buy it or not. So your first 5 pages better be damn good. And
Yeah.
and also figuring out not just first 5 pages, first 5 words, so essential for hooking a reader. So I learned a lot about creating commercially viable works by reading books on craft. And the last one I'd recommend is Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. Really great book by George Booth. No, by Rennie Brown and Dave King. Illustrations by George Booth. that was phenomenal because it was helping me know what my editors were going to be looking for in terms of dialogue, in terms of interstitials, in terms of scenes, in terms of beats. So a lot of reading books on craft and a lot of practice writing. And in my first year, I used my practice writing, short essays, short stories. I did some online writing competitions. I did writer circles at night where other writers were writing and sharing work. I found friends in my network who liked to write, and we would trade, you know, um, prompts with word limits, and we would share back and forth each other's writing, getting feedback, getting used to getting feedback. And by middle part of my first year, I was able to launch my first reader magnet, which is essentially a free dessert. A cookie, some people call it. You're giving it away to people in exchange for their email address. And what it's doing is showing them this is what I write. This is how I write. This is what it's like to read my writing. And in exchange for that, you're going to give me something very personal, your email address, so that I can try to contact you and convince you to buy the things I write down the road. And if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe and you can forget you ever read it. And if you love it, then you're going to be excited to know when my next book or my next piece is coming out. And even your reader magnet needs to be well edited and well produced. And so then in my first year, I also started investing in the infrastructure of being an author website, accounts on major systems like, first and foremost, KDP.Amazon. Half of all book sales in the United States are on Amazon today in the United States. So it's important as an author to be on Amazon. And so I had to learn what that system was and create my profiles. Then I had to get familiar with some writing tools and writing systems, one of which is I use Vellum for my typesetting and layout, and it's really important in producing quality files that can become ebooks as well as files that become print work. And so I just started familiarizing myself with this industry and building out my infrastructure. I had a website, I had a reader magnet, I had an email list. It had 100 people on it. And I just started building slowly out from there. And all while that's happening, now I'm in my my office, dedicated writing time, and I'm writing my book. I'm writing chapter by chapter, I'm writing beat by beat, and I'm working to get the book published. So that was the first year. And for me, it meant ultimately landing with published work. And that's a whole process we can talk about as well. But normally your first year is about refining your craft and it's about building your infrastructure. The other thing that I would mention that I learned in the book launch blueprint and from authormedia.com, you got to read in your genre. Today, what is earning money today in the top 10 in the top 20 in your genre? I read some Hugh Howey. I read The Three Body Problem. I read some Daniel Silva, some James Patterson. I read Eruption. So I was like reading The President is Missing. I read things that people were spending money on in these genres and figuring out what are the conventions they expect. What's the type of character they want to read? What's the type of interstitials they expect? How much description do they want or not want? What is my writing like and how much does it match? Because if I'm writing what I think is political thriller, but actually looks more like romance, there's going to be a problem. So for me, it was the more I read, then when I would sit down to write, I had those rhythms in my head about a James Patterson scene, a Hugh Howey scene, a beat, and how to set that up, how to create the tension the way that a thriller or a sci-fi book is creating that tension.
Right. One more quick question before we sort of get into the sci-fi part of your book. Um, what did you find was the best, let's say the single most effective tool for list building? Because you say you started with about 100 names on your list. So what is there one that stands out, or is it a diverse collection of tools?
I would call them strategies, and I have 4,000 email subscribers today. So I built 4,000 in 1 year,
It's pretty
and I
impressive.
don't think it will be as explosive until maybe I really land on a bestseller list or something like that one day. Thank you for that, though, Edwin. So, two strategies. First, be willing to give away your writing. Join like Story Origin app, join Book Funnel, join Book Sweeps. Um, and when you have your published work on Goodreads, give it away. Um, there's another, can't think of it at the moment, but I will think of it during our conversation. So there's like another version of Goodreads. It's something more international. Um, but what that does is it puts you on lists of free books with other authors in your genre, typically. Um, and then you agree to send that out to your 100 email subscribers. But the other authors on that sign up, that promotion, as they're called, may have 4 or 5,000 subscribers. They're going to send that list to their list as well. So your book is going to get downloaded for free. It's your cookie by those readers who are intrigued by your title, by your cover design. That's pretty much what's selling the book on those promotions. Title, cover design. So if you've invested in a cover that works in your genre and a title that catches attention, you're gonna get some new subscribers from Book Funnel, from Story Origin app, and from like Book Sweeps. The second thing I did that was a very important strategy was using King Sumo to do giveaways on my website. Now you have to be careful because if you give away iPads or Fire tablets, you're going to get people signing up for your email list who love Fire tablets. They're not people who love
Right.
books. So what I started to do after I was up to like 10,000 people at one point, and most of it was people who didn't want to read my works. They quickly jumped off my list after the promotion ended. I started giving away prizes within my category. So I would give away signed copies of books that I could get on Amazon or eBay. So I like found a signed Tom Clancy book. I gave that away. I found a signed copy of an Alan Drury book. I kept that one. I found a signed copy of All the King's Men. So like um those were great examples of now these were prizes that people wanted to sign up for who really were excited about like signed literature in my genre. And I would also make a prize, my literature, signed copy of my book, signed print copy of my book, or other book marketing materials. And so then I would gain 100, 200, 300 new subscribers by doing those giveaways. And I would make sure those giveaways were on things like book sweeps. There was some other, I put them in author groups. I'd put them in reader groups. Instagram, major place to put this type of stuff. I would run ads on Instagram talking about my giveaways. That would generate signups for people who wanted to be part. And I think that's how you build over time. And then you have to engage. I think at least once a month, I tend to send bi-monthly. So once every 2 weeks, I send a newsletter or an email out to my readers on my list. And I usually have three things in it. I have what's new with me, I have an inspirational quote, and then I've got freebies, either free stuff from me or free stuff from other authors, my giveaways, my promotions that I'm running with other authors. And that's what keeps people on those lists. And it also makes sure that they're in the right place. These are not people looking for free cruises. They're not people looking for free iPads. They're people who want to get emails from a political thriller sci-fi author who's sharing with them other free books in political thriller, suspense, and sci-fi. So I think that's the right path. And I think email is the most essential as a starting author because it's going to convert the best. 10% is a very good target to be aiming for. 10% of your list ought to convert into sales. So, like you heard, I have 4,000 readers. I've definitely converted 4,000 email subscribers, 400 of them into paid readers of my work, more than that, in fact. But um, that's where I think you got to focus more than social media in order to build your readership is using email as a marketing vehicle.
Right. Yeah, that's excellent. Just one quick question is, when you start your giveaways, how many people did you have on your list before you started?
I started with that 100 people.
Wow.
What's cool about King Sumo is they get points in the competition, and I knew about King Sumo because my wife and I had run a subscription box company for a while, and we had built her email list up to 7,000 people using King Sumo for her pumpkin subscription box. which is no longer in existence. You can see the pumpkin behind me. You're watching the Edwin on camera, others are not. But um, so in with a King Sumo, the tool is they get an entry for your contest if they enter. They get two more entries if they share it on Facebook, two more entries if they share it on LinkedIn, two more entries if they share it on Twitter, and they can get more entries for when people click on that link and then go enter themselves, right? Because it has this like tracking links built in. And that was really key. Using a tool like that that allows you to um, use the power of social influence and social confirmation that this guy's real, that this is a real contest, and people are willing to tell their friends to join it. That definitely helped me build. I went from 100 to 1700. Then I went from 1700 to 3000 and then to 7000 right away. But that
Wow.
was running the wrong prizes. So when I backed the prizes off into things that were more appropriate, I've landed back in the world of 3000 people who are genuinely interested in my writing.
No, it's excellent. Yeah, because that is one of the challenges is finding the right pathway. And as I said, as you say, I've heard the same issue. Don't use the wrong prizes, or you'll get the wrong
Yes.
people, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, we're starting to get on the long side, but I wanted to, I mean, we could do a Joe Rogan style show here for but
4 hours, right?
yeah, I don't think either of us have quite that time tonight. But as it's a science fiction show, you have some AIs in your story of your political science fiction thriller. What did you call it? Poli-fi.
Poli-fi, yeah.
Well, yeah. But so I wanted to start with so carrying on the writing and book preparation theme is maybe we touch first on your views on the AIs, the creative generative AIs that exist now, then we'll move on into the ones that are in your story.
Yeah.
So you have, I mean, I've seen on your website that you've played around with character generation for your story to try and get an idea of the visuals for who those characters are. And you mentioned to me before we started that you've played around with pseudo right,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm also playing around with at the moment. So I wonder if you can just give me your impressions of sort of because there's quite a we also touched on before we started recording is there's a some strong feelings, shall we say, in the community either way,
Yeah.
and so perhaps you can sort of just give me your thoughts on the usefulness and how to approach these as tools.
Yeah. So I use three different categories of AI right now. One I use is in art design, and I've used both Chat GPT and Midjourney. I've also explored some others, but they were never as good as Midjourney. Midjourney to me is phenomenal in terms of its image generation capabilities. And it has given me the basis of my covers, which I then go and put into Illustrator and further edit, which also Illustrator, Photoshop, the Adobe suite has AI built in it to us today as well. So it makes it very easy for if you have good desktop publishing skills or desktop design skills to be able to do phenomenal things with these tools. And so Midjourney is one I recommend. If you want to be able to create a character, an image of your character from what you're writing, you can go into Midjourney, you can type that prompt up, and in a couple iterations, you can get there. It might take you 40 iterations. You might be lucky and land in three, but you'll get something that you like. The risk is that some people are really, they don't like you telling them what the character looks like. And so I think you have to be careful that you don't turn off readers who don't want to be told the character in your mind is white because in their mind they were black. So you have to find a way to like what are the appropriate boundaries and what is do it in a way that's like fan art, like deviant art, fan lit. Here's me as the author sharing my view of what Valerie Lawrence looks like. But I would love to see your illustration of Valerie Lawrence. And mine is just because I've been living this world for so long. That's my view. Pseudo write is the second category. This is the writing tools that I like to use. I also use Grammarly to help with the creative process. Pseudo write is great because I can write in pseudo write first drafts. I can get suggestions on how to show, not tell. I can get dialogue suggestions. I can get description suggestions. I can also put the outline in there, hero's journey. I can do the snowflake method. I can do Hollywood beats. It'll tell me what to expect in the hero's journey. If I was writing the hero's journey in the story, here's what AI pseudo write thinks ought to be in the story. Here's my warning. It's never right and it's never commercially viable quality. Someday it may be, and it isn't going to be someday 20 years. It's like someday in like 2 to 3 years. There's going to be enough quality there, enough people using that tool that it's going to get much better. But it is like having like it's like having a writing partner who is not as good as you, who's going to tell you, "Hey, why don't you try this out?" And you can say, "Oh, I didn't think about that. Let me try that on," and then go make it better. You can't write a whole book that's of high quality, 3 stars or better using just AI writing tools like pseudo-write. If you want to write 1 star literature that you can throw out there and make $2 or a buck off of each copy, sure, be my guest. But these are tools that I think are really, really powerful in helping people get off the ground and build their confidence and also build their style. What's cool is I can then take book one, duplicate the outlines for book two. Now it's going to start with all those characters. I don't have to rewrite all those descriptions. I don't have to rewrite all that backstory. It's just there. And now it's learning again when it helps me with book two and book three. It already knows what Valerie looks like. It already knows what Jackson speaks like. It already knows what Sylvester Billings is from Louisiana. I don't have to say that again. It knows it. Third category of tool, I use 11 Labs for the narration of my audiobooks. And I have the most heartburn about that because I know there are people who are making their living as being book narrators, and I want to work with them, and I want to be successful enough soon that I can pay someone to go do a human narration of What It Takes to Kill a Bull Moose and Tree of Liberty. As the author, I absolutely wanted and loved the idea of narrating this book myself. Two things stood in the way. One, my house with 3 children, 3 dogs, and a wife who works at home is never quiet enough to record an audiobook. And secondly, I hate the sound of my own voice. So I could not. I tried. I got halfway through the book 4 times, and it just wasn't good enough for me. So when I went on 11 Labs and found out for $99 I could get 500,000 character credits, and I could record a 12-hour audiobook by dropping in my EPUB file. Then I spent 12 hours editing that EPUB file so that the system would not freak out and would not create, and it still does create some inconsistencies in the narration, but it's good enough to sell for $5 on my website. And it's a starting point so that I can earn enough income to hire a $3,000 narrator one day. Again, I have the most heartburn about using that system because I know that is a direct replacement of someone making a living who is far more talented than that technology. But it's what I can afford to do right now. It's helping me get my fiction out into the world. And I am committing right now on this podcast that when I make enough, either in my next Kickstarter or my next, monthly sales, I'm going to get a real human to narrate these books and replace the AI narrator I have now.
Have you reached out to any of the companies, someone like Podium, for example, for narration?
I have not.
Because I've worked with a number of I've interviewed a number of authors who work with Podium, and they have some really quality narrators. Might be something to look into as well.
I'm going to do it. I'll make a note.
So you feature two AIs in your story, from what I can tell. Um, that would be Ziggy and Juniper. I know Ziggy is one. Juniper, that's an AI as well, right? Works.
Yeah, let me just, there's three then.
Okay.
So Juniper is the company that
Okay.
that Marco Alvarez has created, and Juniper has really taken the world to the next level of AI. They've actually created an AI replacement called SI, which is simulated intelligence, and it has started to take and displace jobs from the economy. So there's things that, there's SI bots that work at the fast food restaurant and can not only take your order and take your change, but can literally fry the fries and flip the burgers and package them up and hand them out the window. And the world, as these jobs get replaced, come up with less than flattering terms for the AI bots that do that work. So they call them slingers. The bots that work in fast food are called slingers. The bots that drive cars, they call them hoax after driving Miss Daisy's black chauffeur. There are AI bots that take over in finance, that take over the U.S. mail industry, and it just starts to place millions of workers from the economy. So Juniper is the company behind that technology that then creates the next AI system in the book, which is called the Mark, the capital T. And the Mark is an instantaneous verification about truth or fact, real versus generated in terms of all content on Earth. And what Juniper has made Marco Alvarez, its owner, the richest man on Earth, by doing is every news outlet, every social media feed puts the Mark on their system. And anytime someone tweets, posts, writes a news story, the Mark is able to analyze, and no one knows how, is this story true? If it is, it gets a green check. Is it contains some things that might be biased or generative? It gets a yellow caution sign. Is this outwardly false? Is this completely generated? Is this fictional but being conveyed as fact? If that's true, it gets a black skull. And the Mark then creates the circumstance where people are lazy about doing their own fact finding in the future. They just look for the green check marks and assume that's real. And if they see black skulls, they see that as false. Why this matters in the story is because Marco Alvarez becomes so politically power hungry. At some point in the story, he considers using the Mark to manipulate the news and manipulate what's occurring in the campaign. And there's questions about what would it be like if someone with that much power and that much money could then control what you understand to be true or false. And then the third really prominent piece of AI in the story is Ziggy. She's a sentient AI. Her origins are mysterious. They're not told in book one. There's more shared in book two, but not much. But Ziggy is an AI assistant to Ron Bender, who is a major character in the story. And she is on his phone. She's on anything he owns in terms of technology. And she is constantly there, always of service. She has personality. She has awareness. She, like I said, sentience. So she knows of her own existence. She's still coding. So she's limited by she can simulate emotion, but is she really feeling emotion? That's a question. But she also has vast access to databases and to information that also makes you wonder where has she come from, because she can access government databases and she can access public infrastructure. And so there's questions about what Ziggy can or can't do. And as the book goes on, everyone else in the campaign starts to become more aware that she's more than just a paperclip at the bottom of the Word document here. She is something very powerful and could be unleashed to help their campaign win. And she must be of service and she must not harm anyone. So those are kind of her operating rules. But she is a major character and she becomes more and more prominent towards the end of the book. And she is a major character in book two, Tree of Liberty.
It's kind of like Jarvis's love child or
Yes.
something.
Yes. It's a kind of like Jarvis. And what's the computer from 2001?
Oh, how
Yeah.
9000.
Yeah. So kind of
Ugly,
all
creepy effects
knowing,
were,
dangerous,
right?
sublimely dangerous, you know.
Well, they all will be, won't they?
Yes.
Was the Mark inspired by any sort of real world? Because obviously we've been through some, well, we're still going through it, would suggest, internet censorship attempts, various groups, fact checking, etc. I'll use air quotes, fact checking.
Yeah. It was a business idea I had. I was like, what if I could program something that could help people understand, even if they were to know that this is not completely factual, at least that was driving awareness in their mind. They could still consume it, but they would just know in their mind. So part of it was that. And part of it is when we began our conversation that you've got a landscape of media today that is infotainment. And I think that it has had real implications on the US election and on the British elections and the Italian elections. And so, and you also look back at in 2020 and the interference charges against Russia, and now in 2024, the interference campaigns by China and Iran. So I'm starting to wonder 20 years into the future, what would be the defense against those interference campaigns? It would be having some kind of tool that could tell people. But what if the tool is owned by a company that's not altruistic, who has an owner who's not altruistic, who has an agenda? So now you get in the slippery slope of even a good tool could have an agenda, especially if it's not a public tool. So, um,
And
yeah,
then I
that it
guess,
was,
sorry, I was just going to say, then you get the government itself coming in to strong arm manipulate let's say the tool, the social media, as Zuckerberg has admitted recently, kind of what we already knew,
yeah. And
that the
it,
government
I,
went after that as
I
well.
drop it subtly in the beginning of the book that this thing called Psi Defense, owned by Juniper, AI defense contracts, AI defense tools are outlawed in the United States. And I don't say much more about it, but it plays a major role going into book two. And there's so there you see the first contours of the US saying there are certain AI things we won't do. And one of them is put national defense infrastructure under AI control. And like, so now you start to see, well, what are these boundaries in this future landscape of what AI can do and AI can't do? It can flip hamburgers, but it can't launch missiles. It can fly drones, but it can't fly fighter planes. So, like, what are the reasons for that? I think are those moral boundaries, or what, is it fear? Like, what creates the boundary by the government?
Skynet, yeah, because I mean there is talk of starting talk of moving some of the military under control of AI to some degree, I think. I've
Well,
heard
they're
recently.
talking about this new jet, and I don't know what model it is, but it's going to have fleets of drones that fly with it.
Yeah,
So they have one master craft flown by a pilot, but there'll be drones that mimic its flight and it might carry additional armaments. But it's like we get into some spooky stuff there.
you get kind of like a swarm fighter in a way.
Swarm fighters, yeah, absolutely.
So well, what inspired you to create the AIs in the story then? I mean, at what point, because again, you started this in 2004, AI wasn't really in any form on the radar of most people.
If it was in my head and no one else's, I'd be a billionaire right now. But no. Here's the true fact: is I was rewriting Bull Moose and I stopped to write my reader cookie, the Senate Deception. And the Senate Deception was ground in a time and place, 2039. And I started writing it, and Ron suddenly had this assistant because Ron's this lonely political operative and he needed company. And so I created this AI assistant who was always happy to see him, who doted on him. He configured her to be beautiful, to be his idea of perfect. Ron's in his 70s. The AI assistant's clearly in her 30s. So it's all these things that absolutely are like they're in the real world, but people do these in terms of relationships. But here's Ron hurting no one by just having this AI assistant this way. And he's working late, and he and Jackson in the story, and she says, I want to help you. Um, can I order you dinner? And Jackson says, sure, I could go for Chinese. And so she orders Chinese and Mandarin. And I said, holy cow, that's it. Here is how this story can transform is if I pull the power of AI into the story as a driving part of the story arc, like AI doesn't just help you do things, it does things like you naturally would do it, like ordering Chinese and Mandarin, because that's what the Chinese restaurant speaks down the street. And so then when I went back, I started over with Bull Moose again and now said, yes, it's 2044. But and I knew that AI was going to be a very prominent part of the story, but now I said Ziggy's there and she has way more power as a character in this story than just being a paperclip on the Word document. Um, she is going to be somebody who knows what's going on, who's going to interact with the other characters, who's going to feel upset or anxious. And so that for me, making her a character, not just, oh, AI's in the background, transformed the story into being what I call poli-fi, is having this be right front and center for the reader. And They have to suspend some disbelief in order to go on this ride. They have to believe that sentient AI is possible in 20 years, that it will appear to have emotion, that it can jump technology, whatever technology is in the room, it's going to jump between those devices, and that's a whole new world.
That opens up a number of issues, and I think you've kind of um, not delved into it too much, perhaps to your credit, because it could get very complicated. But obviously, cybersecurity issues, as you just said, she can jump into all kinds of technology, and then social issues with lonely characters and things like that.
Hmm.
So we already have like these social issues that are growing. And do you think that AI, like a personal assistant style AI, which is underdeveloped now? I read an article recently suggesting that people have been asking for it. I don't know if they have or not, but that's what the article said
Hmm.
for a while. And now they're actually developing it so that it can manipulate your website and things like that actively at your command. Do you think these things there's a whole new challenges they bring, isn't there, to society?
Yeah, I think there's also the moral dilemma. The more self-aware that AI becomes, and this is something that I start to touch in at the end of Bull Moose and definitely in Bull Moose 2, is does it start to echo of US slavery if you own a product that is aware of its own existence and has a level of intelligence that perhaps supersedes your own? I own a dog. I own three, in fact, and they know to sleep and they know to go on walks and I feed them and that's our relationship. But the dog doesn't know the stock prices today, and the dog couldn't make its own money and go live down the street in a nicer house. But in the story, the AI assistant Ziggy is assigned to Ron. He owns her, and he at some point, without giving anything away, um, she only exists as long as he exists, presumably, and only can take orders from him. And so if he ceases to exist, or if an AI's owner ceases to exist, what would happen to them if they were sentient? Do we just shut them down and kill them, or what is the definition of kill? So I think that suddenly becomes this dilemma. And definitely the more powerful this stuff gets, and it can jump systems, and if it can jump from, and I'm careful not to call them televisions in the story, I call everything a screen, because I want people to think more creatively about we're surrounded by screens. And if the content we consume can be on any screen, then screens can be everywhere. And just like Netflix can be on one screen, why can't your AI assistant be jumping from screen to screen with you? And I think that's something that makes Ziggy. I didn't want to make her a hologram walking around the room yet, but she's certainly something that can just be there and be available to everyone. And that's me just thinking outside the box. But I think this stuff is going to move more rapidly than 2044. I think the things that I'm describing as 2044 might be real life 2034, because it's just happening so quickly. Now we're starting to see there is starting to become some of these cliffs in terms of development, or these some kind of, not cliffs, but there's some plateaus happening with the next iterations of GPT and some others. So they're not doubling and tripling and quadrupling with every iteration, but there's certainly more power coming. And I think we also need to be clear what the boundaries are. How are we going to use these tools? It's cute to use it to write, and it's cute to use it to make pictures. Do we really want it creating television ads? Do we really want it creating um, oversight of water systems? Do we really want it connected to the nuclear defense system of the United States? Like those are the things we have to start wondering where our boundaries are in terms of this technology.
Yeah, I think we're pretty late in coming to the idea, even the realization of the full scope of these kind of things. I've been thinking for myself for a while on sort of the autonomy issue as well, from a slightly different perspective, because you have more or less a sentient being, but I think that there's digital cloning as well. So you can effectively input a whole bunch of information about yourself, examples, and create digital clones for yourself. And then and then the property of those clones, does that go on in perpetuity with the family? That's not even a sentient entity, but there's still issues there as well. There's just so many things we haven't even considered.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I've asked already. Like my grandfather has handed down to me and my father photographs. Every photograph I've taken since the year 2004 is digital. So what should happen to my photographs when I die? Shouldn't I be able to send the rights of the photography to somebody, to anyone in my family? Like, I think there's real questions of property rights. And this also gets back to the story of why doesn't everyone have a Ziggy in the story? So I had to make sure that there was a reason that she is something unique and different. Otherwise, the story would just be armies of AI assistants fighting each other. So she's the only one. There's another one you see, but when you see it, it doesn't like it's Franklin. It doesn't, it's not as smart as her. It doesn't have access to things that she has. So it makes it clear that she's something separate. And and so that's also like there's going to be classes or levels of AI. I think it's not all going to be equal. And who has access to it? It's going to be a question of capital. It's going to be a question of resources and class. And, you know, it's kind of like Ready Player One. Like you're going to, spend your credits in the ways that you want that make you happy. And if you want an assistant that, plays video games with you, great. If you want an assistant that helps you win a presidential election, maybe that's what you have.
Yeah, I think I mean one of the issues that's going to slow it down for the development is energy cost as well, of
Oh
course, which
yeah.
which goes into whole other issues.
Yeah.
Um, we're running quite late, so I'm gonna move on to the big questions in just a moment. I had one more question, which is, have you thought about writing an origin story for Ziggy then?
Yes, it's in fact, I'm thinking of making it possibly my next reader cookie. Um, is kind of where does Ziggy come from? And I think that story is really exciting. And also for the people who actually want to download it and check it out, they're going to go into the story knowing more about Ziggy, and her origins and her background. But I have to be careful that it's not necessarily something you want to read before you read book one or even book two. I think it's a really good story for book three. But yeah, I have thought about either just taking a scene of her origin and making it the reader cookie or taking her origin story entirely, especially now that she plays such a major role in book two. I think that my readers want to know where the heck has she come from? And is she dangerous? Like that's another question that starts to come up at the end of book two.
So it's almost like a book 2.5 then, or something like
I
that.
think so. I think it might be novella. Like book three in the series might be a novella just about her origin, and you could skip it. Book 2.5. You could skip it if you wanted. Um, but I do think it's definitely something I want to write.
I'm already thinking in directions for your series that you probably have no desire to go in. I mean, like you can bring in aliens and stuff at this point as well. So,
Yeah, I've thought about
so
what more problems to throw at Jackson Piper, and
yeah,
aliens are not off the table. I think I might deal with nuclear war first, though.
yeah. Actually, it's interesting because I was thinking with your series, I have a book that so let's say three-quarters written, uh, set in Canada, which is set in the same time period as yours. And it occurred to me that I could actually have your backstory for the US in with my story for Canada. It would probably
Edwin, let's team up. I love it. It's a great idea.
that would be a pretty cool, yeah.
I like it.
Um, so big questions. I'll just stick with one. I sometimes have up to three, but since we're running quite late, something that's I'm become more interested in the years is the rise and fall of empires, because it feels like we're in a fall of the empire period, and I don't just mean this as the U.S. empire or the UK empire, but it feels like the entire Western project in some ways is in decline. And where goes the West? We don't know what happens after that at this moment because it's sort of the largest political structure, I guess, that's existed in history. Um, and it feels like these might be inevitable, these rises and falls, as part of the sort of the way humans are built and the way we approach empire building. And I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think it's inevitable? And if not, how would you, like, let's say we're in decline, we can see all the issues happening right now. How would you structure a political system that can get itself out of the decline, can prevent that decline, or can reset itself to begin rebuilding itself without having to go through the entire fall?
Yeah, great question. Um, so I think the big question here for me, I think, is a realignment. And I would put it like realignments that have occurred numerous times over the past 400 years of something other than um, monarchies ruling uh, humankind. And so um, I would look at, the rise of France and Napoleon as a period where France had greater prominence and greater power than some of the other empires at the time. And although it then swung back towards, um, monarchy, um, French Revolution and others, notwithstanding, I do think that this realignment occurs again with Germany in World War One and again in World War Two. I think they're almost the same period, just kind of separated in the middle by the loss of a war that then they refuels them to go back at it. So where I think we are today is this realignment of small d democratic West, where the West is um, not going to hold on to the democratic traditions as much as or as it has this tension with what is arising as the power of the non-democratic states, China, Russia, um, Iran, some others. That doesn't mean that the democratic West will fall, but I think they're going to be tested by a rise in power of Russia, of China, um, economically, but also think politically and I think militarily. And, the United States did not jump into World War II willingly or earnestly, and it had to be kind of drug in by Japan. And I think similarly, even though China and Russia are demonstrating their desire to be clear countervailing forces to NATO and to the US alliances, I don't think that Great Britain, the US, France, and others are going to willingly get into a confrontation economically or militarily with these countries. But I do think it'll continue to boil to a point where they will potentially displace the Western alliance. And in Bull Moose, I talk about in passing, NATO's gone. And Russia has a much larger foothold in Europe. And economic dominance has been reduced. I don't say that it's necessarily number two or three in the world, but it's certainly causing pain for the US consumer and the US citizen. So the thing I think we're going to confront is if communist China as oligarchistic Russia, I think, continue to gain in their power and influence because they're willing to use the resources at their disposal to gain advantage. The West is going to be confronted with an existential moment of what are our boundaries for the same pursuit of power, and what do we hold? And I think there's some forces that are trying to drag us towards them and align us with them. And I think that there's going to become a moment where that's going to be the driving question of, what side do we fall? Do we fall on the side of oligarchy and fascism, or are we going to fall on the side of capitalism and democracy? And I don't know that it's as clear cut as we might think it was 10 years ago. There might be a period of time where, you can imagine that there'll be some unique alliances that start to reshuffle the board.
What I'm curious then is, because I do largely agree with you. And it feels like there's a collapse coming, but I also feel like a lot of the powers are aware of these aspects of history and are working in some ways, whether it's in our interest or not, I don't know, to prevent those collapses and sort of reshape them as you're suggesting.
Yeah, so you also asked, like, well, is there anything that can be done to the system? And I think in Bull Moose, I'm looking at the Bull Moose's platform of reform and of popular power. There's a populist movement underway in the US, but it is not a contained populist movement that says, here are new populist powers like the last populist movements in the US. So I get a little more clear in the book, public referenda, the ability for the population to pass laws Congress won't through popular referenda nationwide, recalling Supreme Court decisions. Some of these were actually platforms of the 1912 U.S. Bull Moose Party, which I found to be fascinating. Um, so in those respects, I think putting trust, if we're going to double down on small d democratic politics in the US, then I think moving towards popular referenda, moving towards more distributed power, trusting the electorate to make some more decisions. I think adopting some of what the parliamentary system has in terms of snap elections, coalition governments, those are, I think, are going to be essential to realigning the US so that it does not get drug into an alliance that could be the whims of a singular leader, um, or might be pursuing just populist ideology at the moment. People are hungry for economic vitality and at any cost. Um, and then I also think there has to be, most importantly, a constraining of money and its influence on the system. That is, I think, the greatest crime is the Citizens United decision in the U.S., um, equating money with speech, um, giving corporations the same rights of people. It's a very slippery slope. I don't think it was intended by the framers. And so that's where I feel like if there is anything that's going to pull us back from this brink is to treat corporations like inventions of the state and treat people like what the Declaration of Independence says. They are creations of God, endowed by that God with inalienable rights. The Declaration of Independence does not say corporations formed by people who are created by God. So I think that we've got to start to create a delineation between armies and corporations and people. Because if we don't, then I think we are in for the Nero fate of the U.S. and we don't want to have that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I've been sort of discussing the same kind of ideas with trying to get the people more involved in the process. And like you say, people, groups of people at sort of grassroots levels, building, organizations that then make decisions and things like that. One thing that challenges that right now is all the political structures. Well, there might be changes in the US, I don't know, but over here at the very least all the political structures are localizing. So instead of delocalizing to the population, they're all now getting more localized into central hubs, which distance themselves even further from the population. uh, how can we approach that to sort of try and stop it as it, or correct it perhaps?
Yeah, I think that what we're missing is leaders of the moment. We're missing our Reagans, our Khrushchevs, our Thatchers. We those people are not going into politics. They're going into business. They're going into entrepreneurship. They are not willing to risk their. We started the conversation. What's at what risk is there to pursue politics? I think the price has become so high personally that people are forgoing who would otherwise maybe consider running. And with the information, would Kennedy have ever become president if we had social media in 1960? Probably not. So I think that we have to take a look at like what are the standards for our leaders. But I do think that whether partisan politics becomes more local or more nationalized, the people who drive that, the leaders of those parties can define those parties if they are driven by good aims and by good motivations. If they're driven by self-serving, selfish motivations, I think they'll drag those parties into the ditch and make things worse. And so we need stateswomen, we need statesmen, we need people who are worldly in their worldview, who understand the community of man and women that wrap the globe, and who want to find a way forward for that. And I think that's what Jackson Piper is trying to do in the book. And I'm writing a protagonist. Where I think we're entering an age where people want to read about heroes again they admire. They don't want to necessarily, maybe, I mean, you look at the Joker, like flopped in the US. They don't want to read these dark heroes, these conflicted heroes with bad pasts, House of Cards, Frank Underwood types. I think that moment has passed because the real world has become so much of that. I think we're swinging back to people wanting the altruistic, hero who is flawless or nearly flawless, who they admire in every way, and trying to make sure Jackson Piper's that without being a little too Pollyannish.
Yeah, because I mean, in real life, it is pretty difficult to find such a person, and I think part of the issues with a collapsing society is, like you say, the personal cost maybe for leadership becomes so high that the leaders that come forward, air quotes leaders, um, feed back into the collapse, basically, right? And so you get stuck in this cycle, don't you?
Yep.
But I think we're gonna have to leave it there because we're pretty much out of time. Um, so much to talk about, and we could go on forever. Hopefully, we can have you back again in a few books, maybe.
I'd love that. I would absolutely love that, especially if I write Ziggy's origin story, then I think I'll definitely have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, that'd be great, definitely.
I
Uh,
really enjoyed the conversation, Edwin, especially, we got into politics without getting too, I think, outwardly political. And I think that's maybe something else we need to do as cultures and societies is talk about things in a constructive way that doesn't just turn people off and make people shout. And I think that's good.
yeah, it's an important point. It's very tribal these days, and
It
everyone's
is.
just refuses to listen to other people. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it has been, I agree, it's been great chatting with you as well. And we could go on for hours, or I could have at least, I don't know.
me too.
But unfortunately, that is all our time. So maybe before you go, we'll give you a chance to sort of plug your latest book or all your books, where to find you online, and if you're going to be at any upcoming events or have any other podcasts or news interviews that you've been on you want to plug.
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, Tree of Liberty, Bull Moose book number 2 just came out worldwide on November the 5th. You can get it widely, so it's on Amazon and anywhere else you buy books. It's in print, ebook, as well as audiobook. And it tells the story minutes after the end of book 1, what happens to the Bull Moose party, and is something cataclysmic with the curse of Tippecanoe has happened at the end of book 1. And book 2 picks up, and it's just 20 days in January, examining the results of this contingent election that Piper and Ron have said all along is going to happen to solve the U.S. presidential election. It's arrived, but not as cleanly as they thought. And it's a thrill ride. It's fast paced. We didn't talk a lot about the history. I think book 1, I took some real jumps into history, talking about how the U.S. president doesn't always be the person who gets the most votes, unfortunately. And so in book 2, a little less on the history, but a little more on the machinations of legislative bodies. You really get to jump into the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate in book 2 and get to see them deliberating about how to solve this election. So if you want to follow me, I'm at Michael Fedor Books on Facebook and Instagram. I'm at Michael J. Fedor on Twitter. You can also just go onto my website, michaelfedorbooks.com, and there you can find also my links to Goodreads and BookBub and Amazon and all those other places where you can follow me and friend me and keep up to date and buy my books. Please support me as a debut author trying to build a new subgenre in poli-fi, and read what I'm up to. Subscribe to my newsletter. I'm on Cover to Cover in January. I'm going to be on a couple other podcasts coming up. So just go to your favorite podcast app, search Michael Fedor Bull Moose. You're likely going to find some episodes where I am. And if you're listening and you've got a show, well, give me a shout on social or on my email. Let me know, and I'd love to come be a guest. But Edwin, this has been a joy. I've loved our conversation, the depth today. You're doing a phenomenal job with the show, and I'm grateful as an author for you giving me the opportunity to share my story.
It's been my pleasure. Michael Fedor, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.